Protection from television. Which one of you two were controlling this? Is that you? And you're right here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our community conversation today. My name is Matt Hart. I am West Hartford's town manager. And joining me here today is our Chief of Police, Vernon Riddick. The Chief has served in his role here in West Hartford for a little over 2 years, and I have been here almost 3. The Chief has some tremendous experience. He has worked in law enforcement in Connecticut for a long time. He's a leader here in our state, and I'm thrilled that he is a member of our team. So why are we here today? Why are we having this community conversation? You know, in the wake of the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, we understand that people across our nation, across our state, and here in West Hartford have some very important and legitimate questions for their police departments and law enforcement agencies. Questions about systemic racism, institutional racism, questions about use of force, training, hiring practices, and screening, police budgets, the militarization of the police over past decades, citizen oversight, and other relevant topics. We want to have that conversation here with you today. We want your questions and we want your input. And you can ask us any police-related question that you have today. Our town council, our elected leaders, they are having this conversation with their public safety committee. And I would like to thank Mayor Cantor and Councilor Blanks in particular for their leadership. I want to assure you that the entire town council, all 9 of them, are very, very engaged on these important issues. And the Chief and I want to have this conversation with you at our level today. Before I turn to Chief Riddick to introduce the members of his team and to provide some opening remarks, let me review a few ground rules. So if you are calling in, please mute your lines unless you are speaking. We will take questions by phone as well as through Facebook Live. And we will do our best to toggle back and forth between the 2 platforms so that everyone gets a chance to weigh in. If you are calling in, please do your best to limit your question or your comment to 3 minutes. Also, we would ask that you not ask a follow-up question until everyone else has had an opportunity to ask a question or to share their comments. And we really appreciate your assistance and your cooperation with those ground rules. I will now turn to Chief Riddick, and he can introduce the members of his team, share some brief remarks, and then let's have our conversation. We're excited to be here with you today. We want to talk about these very important subjects, take your questions, and get your feedback and your input. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I appreciate it. And to the residents and the public of West Hartford, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate it on behalf of the entire West Hartford Police Department. There's other things you could have been doing today, but to take some time to share it with us is greatly appreciated. And in order to try and adhere to social distancing, I don't have my entire command staff here, but I do have to my right, your left, Assistant Chief Dan Coppinger, who's in charge of operations, who's been in law enforcement on 30 years or more, and he has served in our our military, our armed forces. So I'm glad to have him. And to my left, I have Assistant Chief Lawrence Terra, who also has upwards of 30 years of law enforcement experience and has also served our military. So God bless them and thank them both. Now, as the town manager said, I want to thank him, the mayor, town council, for keeping the appropriate amount of pressure on the police department, specifically me, to make sure that we address all emails that come in, any complaints that come in, any issues that come in. And they're not just doing it for show. It's a sincere desire because they care. They care about the employees, they care about the constituents, they care about the town. And those who know me know I don't mince my words. And if that were not the case, I wouldn't even share it. So I appreciate the partnership. Sometimes we agree to disagree on some things, but we do it professionally. And there's nothing more that you can ask for that. And this town is being led by quality folks who want to do the right thing for the right reason. So it's an honor and privilege to serve. As far as the police department, overall, I could not be more pleased to be part of the West Hartford Police Department, coming from Waterbury, which I enjoyed my time there. This police department, when I was there, was known statewide for being progressive, professional, and top-notch. And since I've been here, I agree with that, seeing many things from behind the scenes. But all of that does not equate to being perfect. There is room for improvement. We continue and we strive for improvement each and every day, and that's our goal. So I do not want to go long at this point. The town manager, myself, as well as the mayor, in our conversations, we wanted to provide time for the public to ask questions. So here's your opportunity, and there's no third rail here, so feel free. Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate your opening remarks. Why don't we now move forward to take our first question and comment?
Mr. Town Manager, I've unmuted the first caller. If your phone number starts with 860573, you may speak or ask your question now.
I'm not hearing anything, Jerida. I'm not sure if someone's speaking, but I am not hearing anything.
No, I don't think they're speaking, so we're going to move on to the next caller. If your phone number starts with 860798, you may ask your question now. Chief, we may want to remind the callers that they can ask their questions when prompted.
Caller, if you'd like to ask your question, feel free. If you're hearing us, we're not sure if we're coming across. Maybe we'll do a test phone call. We did test it earlier.
Jerida, why don't you move on to the next person?
Why don't you text her?
If your phone number is 860944, please ask your question now.
Hello, this is Douglas Fair, resident of West Hartford. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Jerida, I cannot hear that. I'm not sure we can raise the volume a little bit.
All right. My volume is up.
Okay.
It's better. It's better.
Okay. I hear that there's a military background in the leaders of the police department now. Do you feel that there's been unnecessary bleed down of military tactics for local police? And is it possible to disarm the frontline police in order to focus on what society is foist upon the police, which is social services at the front lines? You have, unfortunately, perhaps too much SWAT equipment, and I would like to know how much military equipment you have, but the continued use of extreme force anywhere in the police universe is unacceptable today, needs to stop, and short of entirely defunding the police department, I would like to see at least the front line disarmed.
Thank you, caller. To the first part, yes, I just wanted to acknowledge the military service of my distinguished assistant chiefs. You know, I think anytime people take their personal time to serve their country, they should be acknowledged for that. I don't think that necessarily automatically equates into a militarization of the police. That has not been the focus or the mission since I've been here, nor has it been the case. We're getting a echo by someone, Jarida. Nor is that our focus now. It's about community-oriented policing. That's our focus. Listening to the public, hearing from the public. You know, we can't deny that years ago there was the top-down approach, military equipment, you know, telling the community what they want, how they're going to do it. That's no longer the case. At least in West Hartford, there's still ways to go nationwide. And my background is all about community policing. Period. There's different models of that. We are in a hybrid currently. We're moving towards, hopefully, more of a regional component of that with different sectors. People be responsible for that and responding, walking beats, park and walks, and the like. And to your last part of your question, you had mentioned as far as military equipment that we received. Since 2007, we've received a total of 47 rifles. Of those 47, 19 are not being used. We have them stored, and we're currently in the process of sending them back to the military. And we do have a total of 28 rifles deployed in the field to respond to active shooters and other very serious incidents. The misconception for many people sometimes when they hear about getting equipment from the military, that it's about just weapons and the like. I'm just going to briefly talk about just a few other things we received from the military. Clothing, cots, an electric generator, toolkits, binoculars, a rifle rack, weapons lights, medical bags, Palm Pilots, mag pouches, insect netting, sleeping bags, shovels, and a JAWS for life. So many, and this is free of cost, by the way. So it's not just, you know, firearms and armored vehicles, but many other usage of the 1033 program. And I thank you, sir, for your call.
Thank you, Chief. Matt Hart here. Let's take a question via Facebook now. We have a question about our Citizens Review Board. Are we going to implement a board in order to stay ahead of the curve? So we have an existing structure in place right now, and I will ask the Chief to elaborate on that in a moment. But yes, this is a very important element for the Town Council, for our Public Safety Committee, for the Chief and myself. We are reviewing the current composition of the board, how it's established, what its powers are. And we're looking at models both in Connecticut and around the country. And we will be recommending some revisions to the Town Council in the near future. Personally, from my standpoint, I think it's very important that the review board be established, if you will, pursuant to town ordinance. Right now, it's established pursuant to police department policy. You know, we'd like to see it codified as an ordinance and make sure that it's consistent. Its powers, its duties, its responsibilities are consistent with best practices around the nation. Chief, can you just add to that briefly, talk a little bit about how the current board works and how we're hoping to improve it moving forward?
Of our Citizens Review Board, admittedly, it's top heavy with law enforcement. 6 of those 9 members are in the police department, and as per your direction, as well as the mayor, we are reviewing that composition. We think it should be more balanced, without question. a couple of models that we're currently looking at. Just very quickly, we have 12. Evanston, Illinois, Cambridge, Mass, Brookline, Mass, Amherst, Mass, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Palo Alto, California, Ann Arbor, Michigan, South Bend, Indiana, Pittsburgh, PA, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles County Sheriff, and Fairfax County, Virginia. That's just a sample what we're currently looking at. We need to change the composition to be more balanced, less law enforcement and more civilians who are on the board. How it currently works, for complaints that come in externally but not internally, they come into the police department, they're investigated, an internal affairs report is produced, it's approved by the chief, that's just the report. That's forwarded to the Civilian Review Board. They sit down, they have a conversation, they review the evidence, whether it's video, hard documentation, whatever it is. They come up with their own recommendations. They submit that to yours truly, the chief. They are not binding, they are recommendations. Then after I review that, and based upon the officer's past history and the like, they have an opportunity to be heard at what's called a watermill panel, where after they go and tell their part of the story, they review it. After I get that, the recommendations, I did met out the discipline, and then we go from there. So again, that process is being revised, the composition of the board, but at least it does show that this town, for decades, has tried to incorporate the public into the process and be open and transparent.
All right, thank you for that, Chief, and I apologize for the feedback. I think we've limited it now. All right, great question on from Facebook there. Why don't we now move forward to our next caller, Gerida?
Mr. Town Manager, thank you. Now have unmuted the line who begins with 860614. You can now unmute your phone and ask your question. Thank you. Caller whose number begins with 860614. You can unmute your phone and ask your question. Okay, I think we're going to move on. Caller whose phone number starts with 860305, you can unmute your phone and ask your question. If you do not speak when I call, you will get disconnected from the line.
And Gerida, just a reminder that folks calling in, they need to unmute their lines in order for us to hear them.
Correct.
All right, why don't we take another question via Facebook?
Okay.
So, another great question here. Does the West Hartford Police Department have body cameras for its officers? If yes, what's our policy on their use? If no, are they being considered? So, Chief, this is an important item we're working on with the Public Safety Committee. If you could talk a little bit about the vehicle cameras that we're using now, as well as our plans to purchase and implement a body camera system.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. The town of West Hartford, the police department in conjunction, as far back as 2014, purchased what's called the WatchGuard system. It's called in-car dash, where we have the camera set up on the dashboard, and our officers are required to have on their lapel is the microphone. It's automated when they put on their lights and siren, it clicks on and it captures anything in front of the vehicle, and sometimes maybe about 200 degrees or so, but definitely not at 360. The audio is on even to a certain range when they're outside the camera so we can hear what's going on. So that's the good thing. Obviously the negative is if you go inside a building, the reception can be compromised. You're not going to hear much. You're out of range. You don't have the visual. So we have had some discussions in the last couple of weeks with the police union regarding some issues and going forward to wear test some body cams in the fall. We're going to solicit some vendors throughout the remainder of this summer. hopefully wear test them with the hopes of next year picking a vendor. I think most people have been paying attention with the legislature here in Connecticut. We fully anticipate this probably being mandated, and it was our hopes to be a funded mandate, and that would lessen the impact, at least locally, on our taxpayers for the funding source and the cost of these body cams. We just did a quick check through the, I think is a WatchGuard the vendor? Yeah, it's about $220,000 for 100 cameras for us. Then you have the ongoing storage costs, which many times are cost prohibitive. So it's a legitimate investment, a significant investment. But I think with our town leadership, well, I know with our town leadership and our leadership here at the PD, it's necessary, and we need to go forward with this.
Thank you, Chief. That is certainly a priority for us. Okay, Jerida, see if you can take another caller. If not, we've received a lot of great questions here via Facebook, but try to take one or two more callers, and we'll switch back to our Facebook questions.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I've now unmuted line 860539. You may unmute your line and ask your question. Caller whose phone number starts with 860539, you may unmute your phone and ask your question now. Okay, we're going to move on. Caller whose number starts with 860916, you have been unmuted and you can ask your question now. Please unmute your phone.
I wonder if they think that every number who called in has a question.
Hi, ma'am. We can hear you. Please ask your question. Hello? Okay, let's move on.
Okay, Jerida, let me go back to Facebook. So here's a question that came in, Chief. What is being done around racial profiling and accountability for those officers who pull people over simply due to the color of their skin? Why don't we talk about our training and accountability on that issue?
Okay, well, first, that's illegal to racially profile someone. We do receive training on racial bias and bigotry, fair and impartial policing, human relations. If someone feels they are a victim of racial profiling, if it's during a motor vehicle stop, they can file a complaint with the Commission on Racial Profiling, www.ct.gov/CHRO, complaint regarding that. They also can file a complaint with the police department here. You can call my office, 860-570-8961. You can also contact our professional standards unit at 860-570-8840. Mr. Manager, obviously, you would entertain any complaint if you wanted to, sir, which I'm sure you would. And the town manager's office number is 860-561-7440. And you can also call if somebody had a complaint. You can call Human Resources at 860-561-7480. Now, again, the additional ones with the town manager, CHRO, Human Resources, those are in the case that people may not feel comfortable coming to the police department or calling the police department regarding that. I would hope that the first call would be to the chief's office or to the direct line if you'd like. We take this very, very serious. Every single complaint that comes in, I review, especially if it's written. I may not hear about every minor complaint that comes in, maybe a language or something along those lines that might go to patrol, but I read every single complaint that comes in. It's reviewed. I give it to the operations assistant chief, or depending upon if it's a class A complaint dealing with excessive force or theft, it will go to professional standards, and something minor regarding language that could stay at the patrol division. So we do take this very, very serious. It will not be tolerated. And in my opinion, if someone has a sustained complaint regarding bigotry, bias, or impartial policing, that does go up to the level of termination if the facts can sustain that.
Thank you, Chief. I have a related follow-up question. So, again, we just talked about how racial profiling is illegal. Here's a related follow-up question. I have heard too many stories about West Hartford police targeting young people of color, stopping and interrogating them, etc., than white young people doing the same things. How will the police adjust their behaviors to account for this presumably unconscious bias and deal with everyone fairly? I know you mentioned that the officers receive training on unconscious and implicit bias. Can you elaborate? Also talk about the reporting we engage in now, how we monitor key statistics, etc., to spot this type of behavior and address it as necessary.
Well, first, I'd like to ask the caller to please, if you have some information or something to support that assertion, I'd appreciate that. If you have some data, or if you have an incident yourself, we will look into that. Again, please give my office a call, because that's very important. We want to hear about that. Secondly, again, that would be, we have our training, our fair and impartial policing, our bigotry and bias training. The police department, the town, the country is a microcosm of the world. So for me to sit here as a chief and to blindly say that we might not have one police officer who might have a bias, I think I'd be disingenuous to that. But I can tell you, I am unaware, nor is my command staff aware of anybody that has that. And if we did, we would handle it immediately. I think many times in the past, police chiefs, organizations have gotten into trouble by saying, they don't have any biases. They don't. Well, that's not true. Everyone has a bias of a sort. So in addition to our research hours and the training I just mentioned, every 3 years, you have to get the bigotry and bias training. You have to get the fair and impartial policing training. You have to get the human relations training. That's just minimum standards. We do roll call training and other type. We send people out for training throughout time to time over the years to try to identify weaknesses. That's our job. That's what we try to do. So that being said, we only can fix what we're aware of. And we can try to anticipate areas of our exposure and our weaknesses. I can personally say I can understand where some of the public can feel and some of the feelings, being a person of color, being a victim of the N-word, a victim of profiling. I understand. I get that. We will not tolerate that here at all. So we try to identify it. We have plans in place. We have the training. And going forward, as far as professional standards and training downstairs, if a person has, I think we're around 3 or 4 use of forces, we try to flag them to see if there's an issue there. It all could be justified. If we get complaints along those natures that might show a pattern, we'll identify that person, see what's going on, see if there is an issue there, and send them for training. And I hope that answers your question, caller, or off Facebook.
Chief, thank you. And I personally have really appreciated, Chief, your willingness to share your personal journey and some of the experiences you've had with racism in your own life. I mean, those stories are they're very, very powerful, and it's important for leaders to share their stories so that we can learn, we can take corrective action, and move forward. A related question to this: can we talk about our work to update our use of force policies? You talked about the training just now that our officers receive on a periodic basis, but let's talk about the work we're doing right now with our Public Safety Committee to update our use of force policies, particularly in the context of 8 Can't Wait, as well as policies we have regarding anti-bias and anti-racism.
Thank you, sir. First of all, a few of our policies are already online. Our fair and impartial policing, one of our use of force policies are on there, and as a third, our complaint process is also on there. You know, the hashtag 8can'twait, it was part of the 21st century policing, some recommendations. You know, I am proud to say that my predecessors and some of this current command staff, the prior chiefs, were really ahead of the curve on this. Everything that was mentioned in the 8can'twait has already been addressed and is addressed in our current policy. What we are doing now, however, is to really clearly define and specify the areas that need to be clarified. You know, for example, duty to intervene. We did have that covered, but we did not have a separate line item, if you will, defining duty to intervene, and what that entails. So now we have done it already. Assistant Chief Tara has been tasked with that. We have a draft policy regarding that, so it's important. The second component of duty to intervene is there to be a charge for no retaliation. You know, we hear about the thin blue line and the like, and retaliation against officers if they want to come forward. So now incorporated in our policy specifically is a duty to intervene and a charge for someone if someone were to retaliate against them. Our chokeholds, again, were identified in our policy. They were only utilized in a lethal force situation. For example, if an officer is truly, their life is in danger, or that of a third person, that's the only situation that'll be authorized. What we've seen in Minnesota, what we've seen in New York, those are not lethal force situations. It would be a violation of our policy. So we will clearly have that defined in our policy now, and outlining that is clearly only for lethal force. That'll also lines up with our CLEF standards, compliance to law enforcement standards and practices that is set out by post and mandatory for all police departments. So we are in line with that. You know, when you have these horrible situations sometimes, you have to look for a silver lining or something positive out of that. Otherwise, you know, why do you go forward? So while we've been ahead of the curve on many things, this definitely provided us an opportunity to change some things, clear up some language, so we can continue to be ahead of the curve going forward.
Thank you, Chief. And I believe that touches on the question we received about policies or practices we've implemented since the death of George Floyd. You know, we talked about the work we're doing now, and you know, that we're continuing with the Public Safety Committee. I want to talk about something just a little bit different for a moment or two, but it's related, and then get back to our questions. You know, in my view, and I think the council shares this, and I suspect many, if not everyone, participating in our call today, you know, understands that the question or the issues around systemic racism and institutional racism are larger than law enforcement, you know, and that they span our entire local government and society overall. And we understand the focus on law enforcement right now, you know, given the tragedies that have occurred, the murders that have occurred. You know, we understand the focus on law enforcement. But if we want to move forward as a local government, we need to look at, and we are looking at, institutional racism and systemic racism across the board, across all aspects of our organization. And we have started that discussion with the town's leadership team. And it touches on many, many areas, as people can imagine. Obvious ones that come to mind are education, maybe human services, but maybe things that are less obvious to people that we need to look at in a critical way are things like planning and zoning and our land use policies. You know, are we willing to have those difficult conversations? Are we willing to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, on those issues? You know, it is easy to decry systemic and institutional racism, to denounce it, but are we willing, do we have the fortitude to address it and take it on in a comprehensive way across the organization? And here in West Hartford, you know, we do. We are taking it on both at a staff level as with our town council. So I just wanted to emphasize that point if I could. The chief talked early on about how our police department, how he was pleased to join us here and what a great and strong team we have here. Personally, I've got a great deal of confidence in his leadership, the leadership of the police department, their larger management team, and a great confidence with our officers. But we understand there is work to do. There's work to do. We can always improve. We are committed. We are committed to doing that, as well as taking a look, a broad look, across our local government organization. So I just want to have a chance to spend a moment or two on that. Chief, any comments you want to add in that regard before we move back to some of our other questions?
Well, thank you, Mr. Manager. I truly appreciate that. You know, right now, law enforcement is the focal point, and I could probably go on for the next hour regarding this. So I'll just say thank you. It is a systemic issue we have to deal with. That's not broad brush painting every person who's not of color that they're racist or they're prejudiced. That's not what we're talking about here. But the problem, sir, is, you know, we have to acknowledge our ugly past. And for those who think it's just in the past, they're just not getting it. They are just not getting it. I've often told the story of my grandmother, who's currently alive. She was 94 years old. She'll be 95 in October, and she was born in 1925. Just think how this world has changed for her, and she lives in the South, and where we are now. And now when I have a conversation with her, to hear her say that she's seeing things now which remind her of her youth, what's that saying about us as a country and the like? You know, people have to understand the impacts of Reconstruction, Jim Crow, you know, peonage. You know, doing some research, we hear the word peon. If you ever have a chance to Google peon and see what it really meant, well, that came after the 13th Amendment, when, you know, slavery is supposedly being abolished. Well, people were forced, beaten into servitude to work for no money and to pay off debts. If you recall, during a previous presentation, I talked about the prison exception to the 13th Amendment. Well, the other hidden part of that was this peonage. So being out after dark for blacks, called the black laws, well, you go to jail. Not having a job, you go to jail. Well, guess who can't get hired during that time in the 1800s? Well, blacks can't. So now you have this peonage, you have the servitude, where you have to work up this debt for years. Technically, it was supposed to be off the books, I believe, 1865, but it wasn't officially until 1940 or 1944. And then we all know many things occurred on into the 1960s. So I'll just stop on that, because I can go on forever and ever. But that's just a follow-up, sir, to the institutional racism that this country has undergone. And by the way, I think it's the best country in the world. I wouldn't want to go anywhere else. But we need to go forward, and we're seeing the manifestation of our history presenting itself currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for your comments on that. And you know, what you're alluding to, it just attests to the importance for all of us to educate ourselves on these issues. And we just can't take it for granted that you know, West Hartford or Connecticut is a more progressive population and a more progressive place to live, and that we don't have these problems. We do. We need to acknowledge it. We need to educate ourselves so that we can recognize the implicit and unconscious biases that we all have. Particularly for those of us who are white. I am a white middle-aged male. Accept responsibility. I need to educate myself, and we all need to make that commitment. I really implore us all to do that. Moving forward to the next question. What kind of, and this is off of Facebook, what kind of positive community outreach and engagement is there with the youth of the West Hartford community? If there is or isn't, how important would this be to the relationship between the police and the community, and how could this be implemented? So Chief, maybe you could talk a little bit about the programs we have in place now and how we're looking to strengthen and expand upon these.
Thank you, sir. Again, West Hartford has a long history regarding this. Being engaged with the community, being engaged with the youth. I'll just quickly list a few of the things that we've been doing historically. We teach at the schools with our SROs, our CR officers, our community relations officers. We handle calls at the respective schools. We have safety climate meetings at the schools. We deal with the I Can Bike. We have the College Academy and the Citizens Academy. Our open houses, our school and job fairs, our cadet program, which stopped in 2016 due to financial issues. We have our Meet Your Beat Officer program, where officers are out in the community dealing with the kids, dealing with the public. You guys hear me okay? We have a monsoon rainstorm that just started behind us. And so there's a huge commitment to our youth. And again, with my background coming from Waterbury with the PAL program, we're trying to start some things back up here, which is difficult because of finances and personnel and the like. How you change perceptions, how you change how people interact with you really starts with our youth. And normally it's a top down, but these changes happen from the bottom up. So we can continue with that. I think Cops and Pops, Coffee with a Cop, all these great things. Now going forward, we need to expand upon this. So people can understand in the public, we've had a difficult time with the transition. We have a lot of officers in the past couple of years who are eligible for retirement. So we've just been trying to keep up at this point and manage. On the books, we're about, I think we have 128 officers now. But we only have maybe 123 or 120 of those who are eligible to work because we're in the academy or they're in training. So once we get closer to fully staffed, we'll be able to get back into the community again, really expand out to the Hannock side of the town and engage in the public, Hillcrest, all these areas. We're trying to get better. That's all. We're not where we need to be. We're definitely on path of getting there.
Thank you for that, Chief. And just to elaborate, from my perspective, that's very important. We want to make sure that we're allocating the resources to those activities. There's more work we need to do in that area. And we're looking at some of the responsibilities the police department has now to see if there's an opportunity to free up some existing resources to focus more on our community engagement efforts. And here's a question that's directly related to that point. Let me take two more questions off of Facebook. Received a good question from the mayor I want to get to, and then we'll get back to our phone calls. Question off of Facebook. Are you planning to have social workers and mental health workers answer calls related to drug use, mental illness, homelessness, etc.? Many incidents of police violence arise when someone in distress and they're not able to comply with police instructions is met with a police response where the officer is expecting violence and fears for their life due to implicit bias or misunderstanding. So, Chief, maybe we can talk a little bit about the The referral process we use with both the town social services department as well as any relevant state agencies. Maybe some work we're doing to strengthen those relationships, but how we work together on these types of calls that come in to make sure that we're responding to them in a holistic manner and in a manner in which the complainant, the person calling for help, feels safe.
Thank you, sir. Well, this is definitely an area that I agree with the caller, or if it came off Facebook, I can't recall who that is. I do believe that law enforcement / public safety has really delved into an area that we are not properly, appropriately trained for. We do have some training in there, but this is not why we took this job. We took the job to help, but there's social workers out there, this is their job. There's mental health doctors out there where this is their field, this is their job. We do have approximately 45 CIT officers trained. All our field training officers are trained with that also, and many of our supervisors. CIT is Crisis Intervention Officer. So, you know, for example, we go to a panhandling complaint or a homeless complaint or a person who might have a substance abuse issue. As the caller states, we do try to de-escalate. We're not trying to elevate to an arrest. We try to get help, but if it does become violent or like, as we've seen on TV, as we've seen on video, this has led to sometimes lethal force. So we're working to get away from that. We have less lethal options. We have bean bags, you know, tasers, the like. But unfortunately, those are still uses of force. So we're still working on our quote-unquote verbal judo to bring people down. I think we have specialists who have gone to school for this, who are trained for this as a profession. I think their skill set is better served in that realm than ours. Secondly, when we were dealing with the panhandlers, we worked with our social services to develop a plan to identify those individuals, get their names, you know, where they're hanging out, where they're going. We brought them to social services to give information to them, and then they can follow up with the necessary assistance that these folks need, whether it's local or at the state level. Part of the problem is resources. You know, how many social workers do we have available? How many people can we deal with? So again, the town holistically, all of us working together, the town manager, the mayor, social services, and the PD, are definitely an area we need to improve upon. We've identified and we shall improve upon. But I definitely agree with the assertion that this is probably not an area we should be the point on. We definitely should supplement if needed, but we should not be the primary, the point.
Thank you, Chief, for that. And since you brought up panhandling, you know, periodically I would like to expand upon that a little bit. So periodically we get questions, we get complaints. Can you talk about what's legally permitted under state and federal law, when the police would be able to take action, but then perhaps most importantly, how we want to approach it in a more holistic manner with human services, as you just mentioned?
Yes, sir. Just a follow-up to the first question. We also have autism awareness training and hearing impaired training too, to deal with those different sets of our population. So, you know, the important thing going forward, actually I forgot your question. Repeat the question again. I lost me. No, the panhandling. What's allowed legally is, and here's we have to help with the public with this, the mere fact that a person is asking for assistance or asking for money is not a violation of law. If they're on a sidewalk, as long as they're not impeding the progress of a pedestrian, as long as they're not walking in the street and impeding traffic, that is not a violation of law. That person has the right to exercise their First Amendment right to have a sign requesting such, whether it's written or verbal form. I think many times the community, you know, they see it as a quality of life issue, and I guess we can understand that, but it's not a legal issue in many times. Where we have taken action, corrective action, and in some cases, an arrest if we have an individual who will not listen to who goes into the road, who's stopping traffic and asking for money, or who's on a sidewalk blocking someone's access. We'll warn them first, but if they refuse to listen or we keep coming back, then we would take additional efforts where there's disorderly conduct, unlawful use of a sidewalk by a pedestrian, creating public disturbance, all these minor infractions and issues we can give out to them. But that's not our primary focus. We all know we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We can arrest them all we want. The next day, they'll be back out again, doing the same thing. So this is where the collaboration with social services is so important, and not just a local level, but also on the state level. Dare I say, unfortunately, I think in all of our years of service, when it comes to tight budget times, and I'll keep this on the federal and state level, but sometimes on the local level too, one of the first cuts come to social services. And then secondly, in the law enforcement world, it comes to training. So hopefully as we go forward, we can keep these as priorities and it can be properly funded. So these people who need the assistance the most can get the assistance that they need.
Thanks, Chief. If I could just elaborate on that for a moment. So many times when we're working on the town's budget, we understand the financial pressures, certainly that we're under, and these challenging times, the impact of property taxes. And when we're in a situation where we're looking to reduce spending, mitigate against any increase in the tax rate, oftentimes the exercise we go through is we try to identify our core services, education, public safety, what have you, and then we look to reduce our more discretionary services. And I think West Hartford, the town council, has a long and proud history of working to preserve the full suite of programs and services that we provide, because things that people may view as more discretionary are actually very important. I talked some moments ago about, are we willing to put our money where our mouth is? If we really support the need, the concept of addressing and eradicating institutional and systemic racism, many of those services that people may view as more discretionary are actually key components to that effort. Services in social services, the library, etc. So, thank you, Chief, for your good comments in that regard. I want to move on to take a question that our mayor has raised, Sherry Cantor. Can we talk a little bit about the culture in the police department and education, and why someone may react, in a member of the department may react in a certain way, based upon culture, based upon the way in which they may have been trained? Chief?
Thank you, sir. Well, Madam Mayor, thank you for that question. As we continue to go forward and we openness, transparency, legitimacy, part of the problem that's definitely negatively impacted law enforcement was the lack of acknowledgement of a police culture, a law enforcement culture. Those of us in the industry, it's the dirty little secret that when you're amongst each other behind closed doors, we can talk about that. We call it sometimes, quote unquote, contempt of cop. If someone talks back to an officer or challenges their authority, they automatically get arrested. Now that's for decades in the past. And again, I'm not putting a broad brush. These are individual officers, but this is real. It's a real phenomenon. This is where training comes in, acknowledging it, recognizing it, and having the courage to address it. Oftentimes if you don't do that, people are concerned about being shunned, not being backed up. Good leadership from your supervisors, especially your first line supervisors, all the way up through the chain of command. You have to identify this culture, and you have to break this culture. People need to understand in our world, you can have the best policies in the world, but culture will trump policy all day, every day. So you have to breach that culture through training, through discipline when needed. And unfortunately, another component of breaking this is through attrition. As a certain segment of officers retire, you have new officers in, you can mold them and train them. That also brings to assistance. Now, when we do this and police officers exercise their authority as they're expected to do, that increases our legitimacy, procedural justice, that we're doing the things we're supposed to do, and people be treated accordingly. And if they need to be arrested, they should. If they don't, then they won't. But we need to address that. More police chiefs, police administrators, and leaders are addressing this now. And again, in my opinion, unfortunately, it's a tragic event with George Floyd, but as a result of that, more leaders having the courage to address and to attempt to break up this police culture in many police departments, not all, but in many police departments.
Thanks, Chief. You made me think of something we've discussed with our Public Safety Committee in the past, and it gets at use of force. I have been very impressed by our officers and how judicious they are. I can recall a situation where an officer was facing someone with a drawn weapon and ended up talking that individual down. I can also recall a situation where someone was attempting suicide by cop, and a good team effort of our officers were able to de-escalate that situation. I think these stories in that context, it's important for our residents to hear about these things too. So could you talk a little bit about those two incidents and how it gets at the quality, if you will, of our use of force training?
Thank you, sir. I think those two examples you provided illustrate the culture in the West Hartford Police Department. We had a situation in 2015 with an officer into a counter with an individual who had a sword. I think the thing's like 5 or 6 feet long. They were able to disarm him without utilizing a firearm, get him into custody, and get him to the assistance that he needed. Most recently, I think it was 2019, was the second incident we had. An individual where a call came in to our dispatch from Hartford, suicide by cop. We did not get that information at the time when it was coming from Hartford to West Hartford. Our officers encountered this individual in a vehicle. He was non-compliant at first, got outside the vehicle, continued to reach in towards his pocket, not being compliant, giving information about the suicide by cop. One of our officers, Officer Teeter, deployed himself tactically behind the individual, utilized his taser, and brought the individual into custody. And we were able to recover a loaded firearm from the gentleman. In my opinion, both situations could have been justified lethal force, but based on the training that officers receive, de-escalation training, not overreacting, not panicking, understanding the entire scenario in front of them, and more importantly, in an attempt to preserve life, it came to a very positive outcome. And if I can take, another minute, sir, you mentioned use of force. I'll just give some quick stats. In 2018, we had 45,319 calls for service and only had 92 cases of use of force, for 0.2%. In 2019, we had 47,593 calls for service, 154 cases of use of force, incidents of use of force, for 0.3%. So not 3% and not 2%, but 0.2% and 0.3%. And in all these situations that I just discussed, no capstone was used, no objects were used by the police officer, and no chokeholds. So we aren't perfect. We are trying to get better, but I believe the overall culture here in the West Hartford Police Department that has been here for decades, the training, the philosophy, the professionalism has led us to, in my opinion, really good numbers that I just depicted to you. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for your response there. A couple other questions we received on Facebook that I want to get to, and then we're going to get back to our callers. So here's another one, slightly different topic. For hiring and the ongoing evaluation of our police department members, do we review social media following or during the hiring process to identify any evidence of potential bias?
Yes, we do. Quick background on myself, and then I'll go forward. I actually served in internal affairs for almost 3 years. Then in my time in Waterbury as a deputy chief, and then later as a chief, reviewed numerous background investigations, numerous discipline. My time here in West Hartford, the same. We created within the past 2 years a professional standards unit. The command staff put that together. And when we do our backgrounds, we most certainly do a social media rake. What I mean by that is we go through, we ask them for their password, we ask them to allow us into their account, and we'll review it. We'll do it on our own, do Google searches and the like. Our background investigation is very thorough and very detailed. If a person has been married before, or an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, we will go talk to them, family members, friends, neighbors, and specific questions are asked regarding gender bias, race bias, or any other type of biases. We ask these questions. Later on, if they continue to go forward, we have a psychological exam and a polygraph exam. The polygraph exam is a lie detector. And these specific questions are asked. Do you have a bias? Have you ever utilized or uttered a racial epithet in your entire life? We ask these questions. And during a psychological exam that's done by a psychologist, certified doctor, they also delve into that. They ask certain questions to create a profile to identify if a person has racial tendencies, and maybe they try to mask it or hide it earlier. And these tests are designed to bring that and to reveal that to the doctor. And we get that information revealed back to the chief's office. And if those indicators are there, they will not be going forward in the process. So I'm very satisfied, and I will speak for our command staff here, with the amount of work and effort that's put into hiring and trying to evaluate and get the appropriate officers here, and definitely to identify any biases that may show up.
Oh, good, Chief. I mean, hiring the right people, that's essential. And we've got a very good track record in that regard. And it's just so important during the hiring process to invest the time and resources to evaluate and screen to make sure that we are bringing the best people on board to serve our organization and our community. A bit of a different question, Chief. I think I can talk about much of this, and then you can elaborate. And this relates to COVID-19. Question. I've seen many people without masks in local businesses. What can we do about that? Well, the town is actually engaged in a multi-pronged effort, if you will, to encourage people to wear their face coverings when they can't appropriately social distance, wash hands, maintain physical and social distancing. We're doing that through a variety of means. We've had an ongoing social media campaign, and we have physical signs placed throughout Town Center and in Blueback Square. We've got a banner on the green that gets at that. We're going to be adding some signage. Our fire department, really want to credit them. They recently stepped up and formed a new patrol that's going out on the weekends in the center and in Blueback to monitor conditions, approach people who might not be wearing a face covering, about the importance of doing so, about the importance of maintaining appropriate physical distancing. They will distribute a mask if someone doesn't have it. People ask, why do I need to wear a mask or face covering in the center? Is that required pursuant to state guidelines? Under the state's guidelines and requirements, you need to wear a face covering when you cannot appropriately physically distance. So in the center, it's often a more crowded environment, right? You know, our sidewalks may be a little bit smaller. You may be closer to people. That's why we want, and we're really encouraging people to wear face coverings when they're in the center, when they're in other areas of town where they cannot maintain 6 feet or more of distance. So please do that. On the enforcement side, we have a combined effort. Primarily, it's health district staff. We have a regional health district here in West Hartford. It's West Hartford and Bloomfield Health District. The health district serves both of our communities. And they are taking the lead with respect to complaints regarding restaurants and other local establishments. So if you have a concern about how a local business is handling it, we want you to contact the health district. You know, they will start with a warning. And then if business is non-compliant, you know, the sanctions will ramp up over time. So that's a long answer to this question, but it's a very important one. This has been a multi-pronged effort that we have been involved in over the past weeks and months, and will continue to be an important one probably for the next several months. Chief, I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add to that one.
You did a good job covering that, sir. I'll just add the town's approach at your direction, as well as the mayor, has been to do our best efforts for voluntary compliance. We are trying not to be out there issuing a bunch of summonses and making arrests. So we agree with that approach. And only in any instances would the caller had asked about enforcement. If we have repeat offenders who refuse to adhere to the request, then we would take the appropriate action. Or if it's really a truly egregious act, we might decide to issue an infraction and the like. But our focus has been education tremendously at the direction from the top, from you and the mayor. And I got to give kudos to the health department and the fire department for their efforts to educating the public. And collectively, we all have to do our part to keep West Hartford safe.
Thank you, Chief. Why don't we now try to take a few of our callers. If you can touch base with a couple of the folks who've called in to see if they have any questions or comments they'd like to add.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I will now unmute telephone line 860-916. If you do not speak or ask a question, you will be disconnected. Please unmute your phone and ask your question. Okay, moving on. I've gone ahead and unmuted line whose phone number starts with 860-306. Please ask your question. A lot of these calls are just to listen in.
I'm just listening in. Yeah, I'm just listening in. Is that allowed?
We prefer that you do it via Facebook or community interactive television. This is strictly for people who have questions, sir.
I don't have Facebook, and you gave me that option, so I'm using that option. I'd like to continue to use that option.
Yeah, Gerida, this is Matt. If I can just weigh in, sir, you are certainly welcome to listen in. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Okay, I've gone ahead and muted line 678598. If you have a question, please ask your question now.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Keisha Answer, and my son, his friend, they were racially profiled last August while they had on their Connor Chieftain football gears. And while the officers are actually Hartford PD officers, but I've been solely trying to get justice for these boys because they had on their football uniforms for Connor. And I really think that this is something that the mayor and the superintendent of school need to be more, they need to be actively involved with, because Hartford PD, the only problem they had with this harassment is that the officers that were on duty, they left their assignment in Hartford to come and harass these boys who are West Hartford residents. So they had on their football uniforms and they knocked on the door. The occupants of the house did not answer. She instead called her Hartford PD officer husband. Now, she said she was afraid. She's a detective in the force. We have since found out that she's a detective. So I'm not sure exactly what she was afraid of. And these boys were, they were stopped. They were racially profiled and stopped. And they're telling me that they weren't racially profiled and there was no civil rights violation. And I am in big disagreement. And I just need to know where I can go for further assistance, because the only problem the Hartford PD chief has is that the officers left their assignment. They said that it was a consensual stop because the boys could have left at any time. Which black boys are going to walk away from officers talking to them? It's traumatic enough being stopped by the officers. Which black boys are going to walk away while officers are talking to them? So I don't understand how they cannot see the power structure, and I don't understand how they cannot see the harassment. So I just need assistance in going forward, because I'm not going to take it as is. I'm going to fight for justice for these boys.
Yeah, Ms. Answer, Matt Hart here. We certainly understand the power of your words and the conviction you have. I think when you initially informed the mayor and the chief and myself about this issue, we were very upset about this. And I know the complaint worked its way through the Hartford system. I can ask the chief to elaborate on that, understanding it's a police department in another jurisdiction. And, we respect our relationships with the city of Hartford and with the Hartford PD. We want to make sure that something like that, actions like that, are not committed by our officers here in West Hartford. But I understand that your son and his friends were victims, if you will, of an action taken by another agency, and we cannot dismiss that. Chief, can you talk a little bit about how the HPD they handled this? They took the complaint in, reviewed it, eventually reached a determination, and how in West Hartford we want to make sure that this sort of thing does not occur, but how we work with regional departments to accomplish the same goal.
Ms. Answer, as you know, when this first came to our attention, approximately, we're almost working on a year ago, the West Hartford Police Department immediately addressed your issue. Personally, I made phone calls to assist with that as soon as I became aware of it. Assistant Chief Coppinger followed up. We were able to quickly determine that it was not West Hartford police officers involved. We referred you to the appropriate authorities over in Hartford. Unfortunately, there was a disposition that was given by Hartford that you're not in agreement with. But it's important to know that officers will be disciplined. There were charges that were found against them, and the chief said that they will be facing potentially suspensions regarding that. Regarding West Hartford, if our officers across to different towns were obligated to notify dispatch that you're going to a different town to investigate, which is routine, by the way, because there's times you have to go over the different town lines for an accident investigation, burglary investigation, whatever the case may be. But normally, if you have a family member involved, you should get permission from the supervisor, and we would reassign that to somebody else. That was an issue, and I believe part of the IA from Hartford addressed that too. On a regional component, I think each particular police department handles it differently. There's not a regional policy regarding that, but I think, dare I say, I can speak on the CAP region chiefs, that all of us would expect our officers not to get involved personally for a situation, especially going across town lines or city lines, that it gives the appearance of impropriety, and too many negative things can happen in that situation, as we found here. So it would not be tolerated here. The appropriate action, would be taken. And again, I know you're not satisfied with the disposition, but the positive side is that there was violations found and discipline is waiting.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Ms. Answer, for your question and your concern. Jerida, can you try to take any other callers? Then we're going to get back to some of our Facebook questions.
Yes, Mr. Manager. So we only have one more line, and that is the person whose phone number starts with 860614. If you have a question, please unmute your phone and ask the question now. This may be another caller just listening in, Mr. Manager.
Okay, thank you. So getting back to some of the questions we received on Facebook, Chief, can you talk a little bit about the current racial and gender makeup of our police department?
Yes, I can. And if I can indulge for 2 seconds, Mr. Manager, before I answer this question, there's a Soraya Velasquez, I guess, who sent several questions in via Facebook, and we'd like to attempt to address to answer her question, and then I will follow up with the demographic question. Her issue deals with, on your budget, it says 50,000 goes to the West Hartford Police for shooting ranges. Is this accurate? That is correct. That was a capital request for a study to see what improvements need to be done, what changes need to be done at the range, as well as to do a study to see the need for potentially a new firing range. Also, as the West Hartford PD thought of reassessing their budget with the town and the state to find ways to reallocate their money to social services, we discussed that earlier. We had that conversation regarding certain things that are better suited outside of the law enforcement perspective, the police department perspective. In my opinion, I don't think that equates to a defunding. That seems to be the secondary component of that. But getting back to the initial question, there's a desperate need for improvement of that range. It is not adequate for our services and our needs. And for our public, it's also very important. When we talk about firearms training, I can easily see that people will conceptualize that it's just shooting a bunch of rounds downrange and into a target. We put our officers through shoot, don't shoot scenarios. Many scenarios we have them where they're not drawing their weapon, or we expect them not to fire their weapon. So it's not just about firing, it's also many scenarios in which you are not supposed to fire, or shouldn't fire. And if they do, we take remedial training and we run them through additional training so they can not react that way in the field. Regarding current demographics, as I mentioned earlier, we're about 126 or so sworn currently. We're budgeted for 132. We currently have 7 Black police officers, 1 Hispanic police officer, and 2 Asian officers. We have 13 female officers currently. So as far as comparing to the percentages to the town's demographics, we're behind with Blacks. In the PD, we're 5.7. The town is 6.2, so we're close. We're severely behind with Hispanics, roughly about 10% based upon 2010 census. We only have 0.82%. And with Asians, the town reflects about 7.6%, and we are down to 1.65. So we're working to try and get into these areas to recruit. Personally, I've been on numerous media sources, whether it's TV, radio, in person. Our command staff, our training people have gone to colleges. We've gone to the community to try and to solicit candidates to make their way through, but it's been challenging. It's an uphill battle, and one not just germane to West Hartford. We encountered the same problem as I did when I was in Waterbury, a much more diverse in comparison to West Hartford, where the population is approximately 50% minority, but yet our racial composition of the police department in totality at that time was about 30%. So we're still, you talked about culture, sir, and we dealt with this earlier. There still is perception. We're still dealing with the manifestation and the results of things from the 1600s, 1700s, 20th century, and the like. To change that perception of law enforcement, that we are welcoming. It is a great profession. So we have work to do. We have done some good things, but we're nowhere near where we need to be.
Thank you, Chief. And one of the personal stories you've shared that I appreciate so much is how you and your brother entered the law enforcement field to make a positive change. And we are committed, not just in the police department, but the town of West Hartford, and I know as well the West Hartford Public Schools. We are committed to outreach on the recruitment side, so that we can reach a very broad and diverse pool of candidates. We understand that takes resources and commitment, and that's been important to the town for some time now, and it's certainly not one that we're going to pull back on. That we realize that there's more work and more progress we need to do there to make sure that we are reaching a broad and diverse pool of candidates, because that's going to benefit us for the long term, that we're more representative of our community at large. Moving on to another question, if I could. The training curriculum for our officers, is that public information? Related to that, is there extensive training? You've touched on this already, Chief. Is there extensive training on personal and interpersonal racism, implicit biases, microaggressions, and cultural humility? So the two parts, is that curriculum public information? And then the training element, which you've already touched on a little bit. And maybe you can also take this opportunity to plug our Citizens Academy.
Thank you, sir. So I'll just briefly go over what some of the post requirements are. Police Officer Standards and Training Council, what gives our guidance for our training within the state. For recertification, post mandates 60 hours over 3 years. The West Hartford Police Department provides 105 hours over those 3 years. Police and the law requirement is 7 hours. We provide 9 hours. Bigotry and bias training, 1 hour over 3 years. We meet that standard. Fair and impartial policing, 1 hour over 3 years. We meet that standard. Human relations, 3 hours over 3 years. We provide 6 hours. Firearms training, 9 hours over 3 years. We provide 25 hours. And again, I want to point when it comes to the firearms, it's shoot, don't shoot. In addition to that, is de-escalation training. There's no post requirement for a minimum standard. We're required to do it, but there's no minimum standard. We provide 4 hours of de-escalation training every single year, annually. So we understand the importance of de-escalation. This has been a focus of this police department for years. Use of force, again, we provide an additional 15 hours annually regarding it. Now, when we say use of force, it seems like a proactive thing and we're applying force. But a part of use of force is not using force, using verbal judo, positioning, de-escalation. That's all part of use of force training. And another very important thing, what we saw in the George Floyd situation, was positional asphyxiation and excited delirium. Our officers get every single year annual training on positional asphyxiation, meaning if someone's laying on the ground and on their stomach and you're sitting on them or applying pressure, that they must be sat up as soon as possible because it's very difficult to breathe and can lead to serious injury or death, as we witnessed in the George Floyd situation. So in addition to that officer having, or former officer having his knee on the neck, the mere fact you had officers sitting on his back, his legs, and the like is an example of positional asphyxiation. So training is extremely important in these areas. As we reflected back and we're doing a reassessment and an evaluation, we are going to increase our bias and bigotry training, our fair and impartial policing training. We have a, is it Power BI? No, Power DMS. We have a software with Power DMS that pushes out the training to our officers. We've had that for how many years? About a year or so. We purchased that and started utilizing that. So now our officers in their vehicles can get this training online. It's pushed out. There's a mandatory test that they have to complete that goes back to training and our administrative captain to make sure they've completed that, so we can tally and track their hours and that they actually completed the training. So it's very, very important. And this goes to something you had tasked me with, sir, when I first started, which was in line with part of my vision also, was using technology, expanding technology, and utilizing that to the benefit of our officers and our constituents, the public.
Thank you, Chief. And just adding to the transparency component, if I could. So we have a couple of our use of force policies posted online, but we are in the process of updating the town's website. We'll have a soft launch of that very, very soon. And that platform is going to enable us to post more of our policies and procedures, training curriculum, etc. So that we want to be transparent. We want members of the public to be able to see the work of our employees in the training that's required of them, as well as reporting on key statistics. We want to be upfront about that. Moving on to a different question, Chief. I have found from personal experience that the West Hartford PD are somewhat ignorant regarding cycling best practices, use of the roadway, pedestrian rights, including marked and unmarked crosswalks, and yielding to pedestrians. This person sees it as a training shortcoming, believes that a recent Council of Government study ranked West Hartford 4th and 5th in the region regarding bike and pedestrian deaths due to motorists. Before I turn to you, Chief, to elaborate or to talk about the training our officers may receive in this area, the town is working actively to promote cycling as a mode of transportation. Not just for recreational purposes, that is important too, but for commuting purposes as well. We're in a community and we're in a region that affords itself well to that. Similarly, with respect to pedestrians, we're almost a fully built out community here in West Hartford. We've got hundreds of miles of sidewalks that we work to maintain and that we're proud of, because having that connectivity is part and parcel of what makes us what we are and the great community we are. So getting off my soapbox for a moment there, Chief, if you could talk a little bit about how the training that West Hartford police officers receive in this area.
All right, first, sir, I'm just going to go back. I didn't fully answer the previous question regarding transparency and the FOI request for our training. It would be FOIable. The only exception would be if there's anything dealing with tactics and that like, and some of the weaponry things that we do, that would be shielded by FOI. But other than that, anything that doesn't fall into that exception would be available. And as you mentioned, it is our goal to put all of our policies eventually online and be accessible for the public. Again, with the exception of those things dealing with tactics and building structure and the like. Regarding bicycles, and when we have the road diet, the bicycle road diet that's going on in town, I'm not as in good shape as you are. I know that you like to get out there and ride your bike and run around. So, I use you for a standard. I'm getting there. But people have to remember that the bicyclists have to adhere to the same rules of the road as vehicles. You can't drive against traffic. You should not be driving on the sidewalk. There's definitely an area that we have refocused some of our attention. This has been an issue, well, directive from you and the mayor regarding this, especially dealing with town center. So we are attempting to redirect our resources there with our 2 bike officers. Regarding training, we host regional training for our police officers for bicycle safety. We also participate in bike rodeos, like and bike and the like. On our priorities, it's moving its way up. No excuse for us, but we have a lot of things going on right now. But right now, with our 2 beat officers and our 2 bicycle officers, we are definitely focusing on pedestrian safety and dealing with bicyclists in town center, blue, black, and townwide.
Thank you, Chief, for that. And yes, we want to make sure that our motorists are respectful of the rights of our cyclists and our pedestrians. If a motorist does something they shouldn't, and we need to hold them accountable. And it's important to train our officers on the pedestrian and the rights that our pedestrians and cyclists have to share the road. Sharing the road is an important component. But to the Chief's point, it goes both ways. And folks who, cyclists, they need to pay attention to the traffic laws as well. Different question, different area, Chief. So something that we're hearing, in Connecticut, but around the country as well. So there's been a lot of talk about collective bargaining agreements, how they could potentially interfere with effective management and necessary discipline within the police department. What perspective do we have with respect to the contract that we have with our police officers? Let me start there by stating that overall, as the lead representative of the town's management team, we work hard to maintain a respectful and productive relationship with all of our collective bargaining units. That does not mean that we agree on each and every issue. We certainly do not. But we understand that it's important for the town. Our employees, represented by our bargaining units, they're critical members of our team. They're critical members of our team. We respect them. We respect the good work that they do. And again, we work hard to make sure that there is a good and healthy working relationship between management and between our various bargaining units. With respect to our collective bargaining agreement with our police officers, we've addressed issues in the past. I think we've made some positive changes over the years that work for both parties, quite frankly. Our union leadership, I want to credit them because they understand the importance of accountability to the public. So, Chief, maybe you can just talk a little bit about the techniques that you utilize within the police department. I talked a little bit about the town's relationship with all of our bargaining units, but maybe you can talk a little bit about, your work with our police union, how you work in a collaborative way to resolve issues, and to what extent, we might see the collective bargaining agreement as an impediment when it comes to holding someone accountable, if indeed we see any obstacles along those lines.
Well, just a little background for the public. In my career, I actually served in the executive board of the Waterbury Police Union for 8 years. I've been part of, I believe, 6 different police contract negotiations. So I have a lot of experience here on the union side as well as the administration side. I am pleased to say in the 2 years that I've been here with the West Hartford PD and dealing with the union, but we have not had one grievance. That does not mean that we've agreed on every single thing, but the union has been very professional. They bring their issues to my attention when need be. We have a professional conversation. We work things out, and we come to an agreement almost all the time. And in those rare occasions that we don't, where they may have had an opportunity to file a grievance, we found some middle ground where both sides maybe have dealt a little bit of pain. So I'm very pleased to go 2 years not to have one grievance filed against the police department. That says a lot about our relationship. Secondarily, with that, there is nothing that's within the West Hartford police contract that impedes or hinders the administration's ability to investigate or met out discipline. There is protocol that we have to follow, but it's not an impediment. And it's industry standard, it's best practices. And again, with my previous experience, I have no issues with it at all. So that's another example of West Hartford being ahead of the curve. Kudos, again, I don't want to tout the union too much to make it a big head, but they broke away from a national union several years ago, so they can have more control themselves on local issues and to be able to resolve issues at the local level without having to deal with national. So again, that shows leadership on their end, leadership here in the town. And again, thus far, I'm ecstatic with the relationship and our ability to deal and solve problems collectively and collaboratively.
Thank you, Chief. And I agree, as I was saying at the beginning, it's so important for any organization, any public sector organization where you have collective bargaining agreements. You need to have that good, healthy, positive work relationship with that fosters respect between both parties. Because if management and the union are in 2 separate camps and they're constantly sniping at one another, the organization and, quite frankly, our community will suffer. In order for us to function as a team and work productively to serve the entire West Hartford community, we've got to work together. And that's what we seek to do. Moving on, different question, Chief. We talked about it a little bit before in the past. We've been talking about use of force throughout this conversation. Here's a more specific one. So why, and it gets at chokeholds. Why are chokeholds even allowed in lethal situations? To allow them to be used under the general blanket of situations that require lethal force will continue to produce situations where citizens are injured or killed. As a Black man living in West Hartford, I worry about chokeholds still allowed to be used under the judgment or discretion, if you will, of our officers.
Well, just a point of clarification, I truly understand the concern of the question, the person who submitted the question. I get it, but there isn't discretion there. It's a clear line. The line is it's not to be used as a restraint. It's not to be used just to subdue someone. It's clearly defined where it has to be a life-threatening situation for the police officer and or a situation of a citizen from the public. Every single scenario in which you can use force or the objects that you can use force with are not promulgated in our policies and procedures. There's times you may be able to use a stick if that's all that you have. When you're in a life-threatening situation, sometimes you need to grab whatever you possibly can that's near you. And some of these things you aren't trained for. You're not trained to use a stick that's on the ground if you're trying to save your life for yourself or someone else. That's not part of your training. But you need to have that flexibility to utilize that to save your life or the citizen's life. Right now the focus is on, as it always should be, and it's primary, on the public and some of the horrendous things we've seen police officers do. But conversely, our police officers have been victimized too. There's been officers over the last couple of weeks who've been shot and killed responding to these protests. There's been officers who've been dragged, severely injured, doing their job. So we need to have that flexibility. It is not discretionary. It has to be life-saving. And I want to say, I believe in discipline when warranted, but I've seen some good quality police officers in my career. And there are many, almost all here in West Hartford. There's always a 1% here or there that might not be the best, but our officers are willing to give up their life for the public. And if they're unwilling to do that, they don't deserve to wear this badge. And Mr. Manager, as you know, when I talk about at the promotions or if I talk at the swearing-ins, you know my line. Our officers must be willing to go out there and protect someone or give up your life if need be. I'm not saying sacrifice it, but you're trained for this. And if you're hiding behind a car, or you're afraid to go inside a building, if you're afraid to make an arrest or to save somebody else's life because you might get hurt, you're not working for me. You're not working for you or the mayor or the administration here at the police department. And I will fire you as fast as I possibly can. That's what we're here to do. That's what our officers are willing to do and have demonstrated to do. So let's not lose focus on that. And it's very, very important.
Chief, thank you for your good answer there. And yes, you are very pointed in your direction to our recruits in those ceremonies. And they certainly pay attention. And, the mayor and I and other council members, we are completely on board with that. We also received some number of questions, and you touched on this earlier as well, about the racial profiling report that the state produces. I think and it's administered by CCSU at present. I know you've only been here a couple of years, Chief, but can you talk a little bit about West Hartford's experience? What statistics might have looked at in the past, where we are now, how we use that report as a tool to improve and make progress.
It's my understanding, I forgot how many years ago, I think it may have been 2016, did you run the report, 14? West Hartford was on the report regarding it didn't say it was racial profiling, it just said that there appeared to be a disproportionate amount of stops. And dare I say, when I was in Waterbury, we also were marked once. So factors taken into consideration. One thing with the CCSU report is what they call the veil of darkness. So we'll use, since I'm black, I'll use black. If during the daytime, 10 blacks are stopped in a motor vehicle stop, but at nighttime, now you only have maybe 2 throughout the entire month, that might be an indicator that race or some other factor is utilized according to that veil of darkness. It's important to understand that this veil of darkness that's used by CCSU, and I'm not throwing shots, it's not something that's industry standard. It's not necessarily recognized as best practices and the like. It's just a measurement. During the motor vehicle stuff, what percentage of, we'll use blacks because it's using myself for an example, are stopped compared to the demographics of the town? Is there a higher proportion regarding that? Again, that's an indicator, doesn't mean that's what the case is. And what CCSU was doing with that was drilling down to find out, well, okay, here it seems to be a higher percentage. Why is that occurring? where is that occurring, what time of day is that occurring. Based upon the research that we've done here and me catching up to speed, once CCSU did come here, we were able to demonstrate to them that our higher amount of calls for service were in the areas where highly densely populated minorities were living. There will also happen to be the same areas where the higher amount of the crimes that were occurring. Our proactive motor vehicle enforcement were happening there in response. Well, that's an oxymoron, proactive in response. But in response to some of the burglaries, the car larcenies, and the thefts, and the like. So those are all mitigating factors. They were utilized and brought up within that report. And going back to implicit bias training, fair and impartial policing, we have to talk about these things. You have to talk about that you might develop a bias if you work a certain area and you come across a certain demographic frequently, that you don't put a blanket statement over these individuals or a thought over these individuals that you might start pulling them over or assuming that they're going to commit crimes. So based upon the fair and impartial policing, the bias and bigotry training that we already conducted and will continue to conduct with more frequency in the future, these are ways that we can mitigate that impact and to assure to the best of our ability that our officers are not pulling over people based upon race.
Thank you, Chief. And I know we're nearing the end of our time with folks today. I think we've responded to most of the questions we've seen or we've received today. I've got one other I'd like you to talk about, and then I want to wrap up with talking about next steps. Next steps with the council, the future community conversations you and I want to hold with people. So the question I see that we did not respond to yet, can you talk more about the role of police in our schools? This writer, I know it can be beneficial to have occasional public safety lessons led by local officers, but are there officers present at the high schools daily? And if so, why? So Chief, maybe if you could talk a little bit about our very successful SRO program and related initiatives.
Thank you, sir. West Hartford has been involved with the school system with their police officers. My gosh, going back here to about in the 60s. In 1973, that the first community relations officer position that was created that interacted with the schools. For the formal SRO program, that started in 2003 at Conard and Hall. In my professional and personal opinion, if the SRO, the school resource officer, is utilized appropriately and properly, it's overwhelmingly positive, without question. The difficulties lie in sometimes when the school administration utilizes the police officer as an arm of discipline in the school. That's not our focus. Our focus are still to enforce laws when we have to, but an arrest is a last resort. And we handpicked individuals to go in these schools. We come down to a list of 2 or 3. Those 3 finalists, when they're selected, they go to the respective school and are interviewed by the teachers and administration there, and they make the final pick based upon fit. Their role is mentorship. Their role is to address issues as they come, to mediate. Their role is to anticipate problems. A great sign of a successful school resource program is what intelligence do you get from the kids? Where are the parties going to be held? When's the big fight going to happen? Who may have drugs and the like? Having drug possession is not a mandatory arrest. That's a prime opportunity to intervene, interact, and to provide the necessary assistance to that student. If we all look back, we've all done some really stupid stuff when we were young. Some of us multiple times, other of us learned a lesson, but when you get that good mentor, that person who understands, who can facilitate, who can mediate, and provide some guidance, that's the role, that's the function of the school resource officer. I am a firm supporter. I believe it's extremely important. You know, one thing we can't quantify is how many crimes we prevent in these schools. We can't quantify how many fights we prevent. How many deaths we prevent where a kid may have drank alcohol and driven, but because you have a conversation with the SRO, they chose not to. We can't quantify that, but those are legitimate things that occur. And in my opinion, it's preservation of life. Now, again, some jurisdictions may utilize them inappropriately, then that does become a problem. You have the school to prison pipeline, but that is not the case here in West Hartford.
Thank you, Chief. I know we want to wrap up for 2 p.m. I did just refresh my screen, and there are a couple of questions we did not respond to. So just a couple things quickly, and then I want to wrap up with the next steps. So one, could you talk about question? Do the West Hartford Police receive are they subject to random drug testing, including steroid abuse? You know, could you touch on that? And then a very different question, would you consider a community advisory group to work alongside of the West Hartford Police Department? You know, in response to that second question, the community advisory group, you know, that's a policy question as well. You know, I would certainly be amenable to that idea. And I think as part of our research, when we look at citizen review boards, not only in Connecticut, but across the country, you know, what are the best practices around that? How should these groups be comprised? What's the composition of them? What powers and responsibilities do we have, et cetera? You know, community advisory group, you know, there could be a good connection there too. So Chief, again, the two questions, and they're different. Can you talk about any drug testing that our officers are subject to, and then comment on the community advisory group question?
Thank you, sir. You know, the reason why I'm laughing, for the public who can see that, is my staff is making jokes. I need to take some steroids because I'm, you know, completely out of shape and my stomach's hanging over my belt. But that shows how much they actually care about me. We do not have a policy for drug testing currently in the department. That would be an issue that has to be bargained for and negotiated with the union to discuss the impacts. So the contract is not up until next year. That would definitely be something that has to be talked about with the union. In my former job, that was placed in the contract several years ago, you know, for steroids, opioids, and the like. You know, for us to think that we might not have someone here with a problem, I think is not being realistic. But I don't think that I've seen no evidence, and as I look to my command staff, of anyone that might have a substance abuse issue that has manifested itself in job performance, or we've been notified on something along those lines. So again, it has to be it's a mandatory subject of bargaining. That'll be something we'd have to negotiate. To the second part of the question, we'd have to do more research on a policy advisory board. I don't want to have too many boards. We have a public safety committee, we have a citizen review board, and now we're maybe talking about a policy review committee. If we can have the review committee be part of the citizen review, I think there could be some room for discussion there. Not totally adverse. I do think we need to be careful regarding how far we reach into these things. You know, you hired a chief for a reason. You have a command staff for a reason. And I know that there might be people from the public who will say, well, the police can't police themselves. But we have good, strong leaders who have integrity, who have honor, and want to do the right thing. I think there's a middle ground for that. And I think with our recomposition of our citizen review board and how we decide between you and the mayor to get that set forward, we can accomplish a lot of that together in that board.
Thank you, Chief. So we're approaching the end of our time together here today. And we're going to scan the list of questions to make sure, if there were any that we didn't respond to, we want to make sure that we respond to you. We're also going to continue to have these conversations. The Town Council's Public Safety Committee, which I mentioned earlier, that's one of the council's standing committees. The Public Safety Committee will meet again at 5:30 p.m. a week from today on July 8th, and they will meet in a virtual manner. 5:30 p.m. Wednesday, July 8th, and they will open the meeting with a public comment period. So that will be an opportunity for you to raise questions, ask questions, make comments to your elected leaders, our town council as well. The chief and I, we want to schedule more of these conversations. We're going to look to do one the following week, on this Wednesday schedule. We're going to look to have another one of these conversations on July 15th. And we're going to choose another time of day. I'm not sure which one yet. It'll be morning or evening, but we'll make sure to get the word out. And we'd love to hear from you again. I want to thank everybody who's taken the time to participate in this conversation today. I want to thank Chief Riddick and his team. I want to thank our officers for the great work they do on behalf of our community each and every day. Sincere appreciation for their efforts and their commitment to taking on the questions around systemic and institutional racism, addressing those, improving on what we do, working to eradicate that, and moving forward. Thank you again for your time today. We look forward to talking with you again in the future. Also want to thank our town council for their leadership and their commitment to addressing these issues as well. Chief, any concluding comments you'd like to add?
Thank you, sir. I again like to reiterate, I appreciate your support, the mayor's support, to allow us to do what we need to do. That's extremely important. I also echo the sentiments regarding the police officers. I've done that publicly in the past. I will continue to do that. Hold us accountable. That goes for the public. That goes for you, the mayor. We're not afraid of that. We have a high bar for ourselves, and we strive every day to achieve that bar. I also want to recognize and acknowledge, let the public know, during this entire COVID-19 situation, our police officers rarely used vacation days. They came to work. They understood the importance of coming to work. As a result of them accumulating additional vacation days, because they didn't utilize that, we came to an agreement with the police union for our officers to carry over their vacation time so they wouldn't lose them. So that's a testament to the character and the quality and the professionalism of the police officers that we have here. They sacrificed their contractual obligated time to come to work in one of the worst pandemics in the history of our nation to make sure they can keep our department safe, our public safe, and our town safe. So I commend them for that. That says a lot. Lastly, there may have been some questions, some issues regarding transparency. In these past 3 or 4 weeks, someone from the administration, we have been on Face to State, we have been on Face to Facts, we have been on weha.com, we have been on a community forum called Pull Off the Band-Aid. We've been interviewed by Esquire magazine. I have been asked to sit on a police accountability task force by the Connecticut Bar Association, and we are an advisory arm to the legislative police accountability task force. So we're hitting these things head on. We're not hiding from anything at all. We put ourselves out there as a model. We put ourselves out there understanding we have a need for improvement, but we're not afraid of change. We're not afraid to get better. And I understand the task in front of us. I understand the needs and the desires from the town manager and the mayor. You hold me accountable, as we do in our almost daily conversations. You expect and you desire nothing but the best. That's what we strive to do each and every day. So I thank you for this time. This forum is another example of community policing. We did not want to direct the conversation, the dialogue. The town manager made that clear, that he wanted to hear from the public. And that's what we're doing as we continue to go forward with these type of venues. So thank you for this time. I thank the citizens, and I thank our police officers and our command staff here for their time in setting things up. God bless you all.
Thank you, Chief. And one last element I want to mention. I talked about the next steps with our community conversation. Our Noah Webster House, which is West Hartford's historical society, they are presently working on a forum and a whole series of conversations that will extend over the next several months, getting at the larger issue that we talked about earlier, the larger issue of how to best address systemic and institutional racism across society, across our community. Starting off with the law enforcement discussion, understanding how important that is right now, but also understanding how it really encompasses all of society and local government across departments. And that will be an important conversation that Noah Webster will convene. I want to thank them for their leadership in that regard. And I look forward to the forums that they're planning to hold in the future. Thank you all again for joining us today. We hope that everyone has a safe, be careful with the fireworks. Please have a safe and enjoyable 4th of July weekend. The Chief and I and the rest of the team, we look forward to seeing you again online or out in the community soon. Take care, everybody.
See you. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.